2K announced pricing for NBA 2K21 last week. And on the PlayStation...
Oh, it's a video game. It's $60. Yeah, that's how this works.
On the PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, it will be $69.99.
What?
Nice. For the base version.
Oh, not nice.
For the base version, just on those consoles. It's still going to be $60.
Not the digital deluxe version?
No. So this is...
Not the gold edition?
This is strange and confusing.
That's the $100.
Legendary edition?
$100.
Oh, I'm sorry. You mean the Mamba Forever edition?
Right, that one. Yep.
Oh, man.
So... I mean, we've been talking for a while, like smart deliveries on the Xbox. Like, sounds like Sony has basically the same policy, even though they don't have a nice name for it, which is basically that publishers can decide what they want to do about upgrading you to next-gen versions and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I guess it was only a matter of time before a publisher came along and made the shitty decision.
And said no.
As opposed to the friendly one that everybody else has been
But
making.
there is an upgrade path, right?
There is, but that's where the Mamba Forever edition comes in. So basically the upshot is if you buy NBA 2K21 on one of the current consoles, it's $60, and that's all you get. You do not get a free upgrade to the next-gen versions, which they say are totally different and designed from the ground up for the next-gen hardware, meaning that they feel justified in charging an extra $10 for that version. So you will buy the game again if you want that version on the new consoles, or you can get the $100 Mamba Forever edition and get a free upgrade. So
somebody had to pull the trigger at some point, and companies have been pushing this boundary for quite a while. Offering digital upgrades, and the trend that I've been seeing a lot lately is you're not really getting much of an upgrade. When you're getting the digital deluxe version, you're getting a soundtrack, you're getting an art book, but you're paying $10 more. I think it's just been a way of grooming us into the new norm, as it were.
I think
with a higher price point.
Yeah, and it's especially, I think it's especially egregious for. This will probably feel different if every game for those platforms ends up being $70.
Yeah. Well, so that's what this is kind of a precursor to, right? Or this at least starts the conversation about Jeff, I'm sure you remember, even I was several years into GameSpot at the time that the 360 came out, and wasn't Kodak the one that led that charge on moving to $60? Activision was out there saying all of our games are going to be $60 from the next generation. Just get used to it. Yeah. And that was a huge deal even then. And it seems like this. It seems like it's probably on the cusp of happening again.
I don't think that they would do this just hey, we think we can get away. But I guess in a vacuum, taking the news as it is right now, and where this is the only game we know about that is doing this, it's especially egregious when you've got a game that is so microtransaction laden as NBA 2K has been. And they even say in their little chart they put out, it's hey, your currency and stuff will transfer from one generation to the next as long as you don't cross brands. Your 2K bucks or whatever the fuck they call them will go from Xbox One to Xbox Series X and PS4 to PS5. So I think that's the part that feels almost weird business in a sense with this game as well, because at a certain point you want to get people in the door so that they start spending more money, and on to that end I feel like NBA 2K has been a game that has been $30 months after release, weeks, very soon after release that price comes down, because they want to get people in the door and hopefully get them to transact on top of that. So bumping up to $70 creates a harder barrier there for people to get in the door, especially people who have just spent however many hundreds of dollars to buy a console. So I think that's a weird choice to make if they end up being the only ones that go to $70. But I think what we're seeing here is that this is probably how it's going to go, right? I mean.
There was a lot of discussion around the last big flare up around labor practices. There was a lot of discussion that would kind of come back to the point that some publishers were out there saying well, you're paying $60 for this. We can't if you want to pay more for video games, then maybe maybe there wouldn't be crunch and all this other stuff.
Which gonna fucking fix?
No, it's
shit.
not. It's not. Gonna...
It's not. At the end of the day, it's not. It might help. Like honestly, paying $60, like the rate at which video games have cost $60 versus inflation is actually like pretty crazy, because even movie prices have gone up, other stuff has gone up, but this is not like 2K being out there saying like, we're doing this for our developers and stuff like that. No, it's fucking 2K.
Yeah. I feel there are like two different conversations here, right? There's like the objective economics of like, what did $60 amount to in 2005 versus 15 years later? And then there's the much fuzzier conversation of how do these companies conduct their own internal business, right?
Yeah.
Like how do they treat their employees? Like, where is the money going, et cetera, et cetera? Like, those are kind of two different things. But I should mention before we get deeper into this that GamesIndustry.biz has a story where they talk to the head of IDG Consulting, who says that, sure enough, other publishers are also considering this move to a permanent $70 price point for new games.
It's not I feel like it's shocking when you first see it, because you're like, oh fuck, and you think about it for a while, you go, oh right, yeah, I guess they're gonna try to push this when a new platform comes around. And I don't know. I thought that they had found a happy medium along with all the digital, the collector's editions, all the other crap they sell in addition to the game. If you want the hot extra skins, you got to pay for this. We'll bundle in the season pass, and then on top of that, give you an extra few things. And I think probably, if I had to guess what their data shows, is that there's a number of players that will pay a price to play a game at launch, and then players who are more price sensitive who will wait for a sale. And the bump from 60 to 70 probably doesn't impact those launch day one numbers. Those players are probably still going to go like, well, I still want to play this at launch. I still need to be able to talk about it with my friends. I still want to do this. I still, they care enough about that aspect of this to just pay the extra $10. Yeah. And maybe you get a situation where those players don't go on to buy some collector's edition or something like that, assuming those prices go up another $10 on top of that. If they're paying $70 for more games, then maybe they end up saying like, oh well, I'm not going to go get some weird bad version of it or something like that.
Yeah, that makes sense, that there's totally a class of game where this flies a little more easier. It's the sports games, it's like a Call of Duty, any sort of like franchise thing that is really popular with people who are like, I have to get the new version, like you were saying.
And people are conditioned. I think the people that like to wait for sales are conditioned to wait for sales, and more often than not, with a few publishers that are really protective of their pricing, they get those sales. Like 2K, especially a sports game that's annualized like that. Like that is built, and who knows how this year will go. Just I guess they're going to try to play basketball someday. But like in with all that stuff going on, the idea of an annual sports game and stuff when the sport might not happen or is happening in a weird way probably disrupts that a little bit. But it was traditionally like, hey, when Madden comes out, it's full price. And like, as the football season wears on and people are like, all the people who were hyped about football bought the game already. At some point, you got to go like, hey, we got to blow these things out. And then at the end of the season, if you're trying to sell that game back used, you get like $1 for it, because all the used game shops know that the next one's right around the corner, and they're like, no one's going to buy last year's fucking football game. And so those things just never held value to begin with. But like for stuff like Call of Duty, for stuff like, well, I was going to say Nintendo's games, but it's not like they're launching a console.
No,
so,
but that does make me wonder if this catches on, does Nintendo just quietly start moving all their first-party Switch games to 70 as well?
No, because weren't they the ones that like when was it on the 3DS that their games were traditionally $10 cheaper?
I guess that's but not so much on the Switch, right? Isn't everything 60?
No, not on the Switch. But so my point being, I don't think they would feel the need to go there, and I don't think third parties could necessarily get away with it on the Switch. We're seeing a lot more sales on consoles, like as they get more and more people to shift over to digital purchasing, they incentivize that by having more and more sales. It's not quite Steam, but I think we were talking about it last week, but it was like that idea of just like, hey, there are more here's the summer sale on the PlayStation Store. Here's the big Christmas sale on Xbox. They
feel like
that
PSN in particular, I feel like is not quite Steam, but they're getting there, or they're pretty close. Like you'll see,
sure,
like all of the big Sony first party games of the last couple of years for like $15 during a lot of their sales. Like it's pretty big third party games for like $5-8, stuff like that. Like it's not like in a world where that culture hadn't emerged across like all digital storefronts, this news would sting a lot more.
Totally.
But there's that like Game Pass. Like
Game Pass,
there are at least other like better value propositions out there.
And there's a lot of different ways to get games now. And so everyone talks about their backlog. Everyone talks about how many games they're getting and not playing. I think probably that if you don't like paying $70 for games, don't.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as just don't. And send that message of just like, oh yeah, when you have a sale, I'll pick it up. But I've got all these games on Game Pass, or I've got all these games I bought in the last sale that I haven't touched yet, or something
I feel
like that.
Like that's the most common reaction I see to Steam sales these days is like, man, I wish there was something I still needed to buy because I have everything.
Right.
Now.
Yeah. That's a ridiculous. It's ridiculous. That's the idea that people say that is nonsense, but the same games go on sale every Steam sale. So at some point anything that you were going like, oh, I heard that was good. You fucking bought it already.
Yeah.
Probably bought it the last sale for 80% off for some dumb amount of money.
Yeah.
You might still have all those itch games to go through, the 9,000 games or whatever you got in that bundle. So there's no shortage of games. There's no shortage of ways to play games, and games range so much more in price now than they did at the start of the last generation.
Yeah.
When you think about it, that I think that's not to like excuse what they're doing or anything. I think that like moving to $70, I don't think that's great. If they can back it up and say, hey, these games are costing us way more money, because that was when they went to 60, the justification was like, hey, the cost to make these games has gone way up, particularly on the art. We're making HD art, this high def art. Oh man, it's so expensive with all this resolution. And now I guess like it's going to be in 4K, but like all these third party publishers are making games on PC anyway. So weren't they already haven't they been kind of doing some of that work? I ain't a game developer, so I don't know, but I feel like that excuse of, oh man, the art, I don't know, like that seems like that would be a weird one for them to go back to a second time. But I think what I have seen some people float out there is like, hey, the cost of making games actually has gone way up in a lot of different ways.
I think you see it in a lot of games, like there's fidelity, but there's also just quantity, like
sure. Yeah.
Last of Us 2 is a 30+ hour game, and I don't think there's a single repeated art asset across that whole game. Like every single fucking like hollowed out apartment you pick your way through, it looks more or less completely. Maybe there's the same couch a couple times.
Sure, right.
But like just the sheer quantity of just like objects and like set dressing that they had to come up with for that game. Like I cannot imagine how many people it took to do that stuff.
Yeah, and that's stuff that if you're a first party, you can start to think about that in ways of like, well, we sell consoles, we sell, we build goodwill for the next console.
I was thinking about like Sony is one of the few I can think of that still makes just like the flat $60 single player game without really a lot of bolt on transactions. I mean, granted, like Horizon got a DLC, like one story DLC.
Yeah.
Like Last of Us maybe we'll get like one thing, but like. They're not out there selling like backpack skins for Ellie or something like that. Like they're one of the few I feel like that still is just like, here's a game for the price it costs, and you will play it and you will finish it, and that'll be it.
Yeah, I feel like that's the thing that Microsoft is going to chase, right? Like that's the if you look at the Microsoft catalog and how they handled games over this last generation, and everything they've talked about, like, hey, we're starting some new studios, we're buying some studios, we're trying to do this and that. Like it feels like one of the potential routes they could go is to try to get into this like quote unquote like prestige single player game. But even with if it having multiplayer, like Halo used to kind of be in that tier, and it doesn't quite feel like it's special the way it was.
Right.
But
so both cases,
get back to that.
Like you said, those are still both companies pushing a hardware platform. Like they can make those investments in those games and see it pay off in ways other than the actual sales numbers of the games themselves.
Yeah, so I wonder if Microsoft tries to, because I think that's the thing. You look at Sony, and what does Sony have that no one else does? Well, not that Microsoft doesn't specifically. It's that they make that continued investment in story-driven single-player games.
Yeah.
And I wonder if Microsoft will attempt to go after that more directly this time out. Anyway.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's the seal has been broken, I guess, on this. We'll see how soon or if every other company comes around to it. I don't know how fast this is going to catch on, or if it's a sure thing that everybody will follow suit. I don't know. I mean, this seems like it was inevitable to me eventually.
I think it depends on how the game does, right?
No, by the time these games launch, the decision will be made.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, there will be an initial, but I mean, like, do you see a reality? Let's say, like, some other publishers go ahead and do it. Do you think there's ever like, oh no, we're gonna scale it? 60 was actually okay, and
I think at some point, like everyone involved will want to protect the potential of a $70 price tag, so they launch at 70 and cut. I want to say that I could be misremembering, but I want to say that like the $60 price tag on Xbox 360 games was like enforced for a time, and that eventually they got into more and more budget games and had more flexibility on pricing. But I want to say out of the gate there was a real push to say no, games on this platform cost $60, so that you didn't have those sorts of situations. I want to say Microsoft enforced that, but I could be making that. But I definitely remember hearing that there was definitely like a concerted effort to not allow lower prices, and so you had games that you looked at and be like, this should be maybe not quite a budget game, but somewhere in between the $20 game and the $60 game, and no one could really do that around launch anyway. So yeah, I don't know.